Greetings everyone, I am RSV. I want to talk about the Retem Survey results that popped up on the NGS site recently and just share my opinion of them. I'll be going through each category and just summarizing my thoughts on it and trying to figure out why some points may be the case. Satisfaction with Chapter 2 story. I think most people agree that the story is kind of in a bad spot right now. Looking at this, there's always a more positive global view of the game than a JP view of the game. However, both nearly unanimously agree, and by that I mean global has doubled the acceptance of story volume in the game currently. I think that this point in particular was misconstrued by a larger number of people, but let's go over story volume. What is meant by this? Story volume means the amount of story beats that were in the game. Now, I agree that there was a very lacking amount of story beats within the game. However, I don't really necessarily think that the story beats themselves are really the problem either. I think that the story just doesn't progress enough in the world of NGS, and that is the problem with the story, as opposed to necessarily being too lacking, if that makes sense. I think that base game in the year that it did episode 1 had a similar amount of story quests, but in those story quests there was just more progress, more plot development, and the plot was just more fleshed out. So I think that this is a more important thing to look at. There's just more plot development going on in base game, and NGS has a lot of plot points that don't go anywhere. Satisfaction with exploration and combat vectors in Retem. Honestly, I mostly agree with this chart. I don't really think I need to say anything on any of these regards. The exploration sectors are fine. I think the real problem is in the combat sectors, especially where they just feel monotonous and repetitive, and I think that there just needs to be more random events like Captain in those areas to really spice them up and make them more interesting. I will, however, address the height differences in field being too steep. I'll also say there are a lot of obstructions that PA cannot pass through, like random plants that our PAs will hit and collide with, rather than actually hitting the boss, which can be annoying, but it adds ambience to the zone. So I think that the height differences and this actual problem isn't a big deal. I think maybe the problem there lies with making the minerals more visible, and making just the items pick up more visible is more important in this scenario. The last thing I'll note on this topic is that enemies in the keep lower level are very unbalanced compared to Alnoth, and that is a huge problem, as it causes players to funnel themselves to Alnoth and not take advantage of having 2 different zones to quest in. However, it is also a step back from having 3 zones to quest in, so I think that is also part of the problem, is that we just don't have the variety. If there was a 3rd Retem combat zone, we might not have had an issue here, because we might have still had 2 zones that people can frequent and reliably grind. So I think that is a point to be made from that as well. Urgent quests in Retem. Going over both the urgent quests that we had access to, both of them seem to have a problem with their difficulty and reward loop. I think that for their difficulty level, the reward loop made sense, because these were not difficult pieces of content. They were not hard. They had no difficulty. They were there purely for leveling up purposes, which means that they lost their chance to be a really good source of resources, and that is part of the problem with them. I feel like they needed more difficulty for them to be more viable resource nodes, for people to actually go out and farm and get higher level equipment from. And I think that their solution to urgent quests is a little short-sighted. Just adding guaranteed rewards to urgent quests doesn't make them any more fulfilling when everyone has that reward. That doesn't really add an actual reward to the loop, that just adds an item to the pool that we always get. And it also means that the price of that item on the player shop will drop dramatically, decreasing the meaning of that item even further. Satisfaction with each class and weapon type. I think this is fair. You need to have played all weapons to understand the issues of each weapon, and it really shows which weapons are not getting as much attention as they need, or they really need work. I can't personally comment on any of the classes that I have played. I think the classes I have played are all pretty good. I think Gunner, Bow, and Double Saber are in pretty good places. If anything, my opinion on them is that their damage needs to be more competitive across all 3 of these categories. Feedback regarding 5-star rarity weapon. It is great to see that Sega are planning on doing a weapon for each series. However, I feel like this might end up reducing the amount of series that we get in the future, as they have only teased 2 series for the various region when we did get 3 going into Retem. It is possible they are hiding a relic for Caveris region, however, this is uncertain, and we will have to wait and see on that note. They talked about the relic series in the survey, and I think that this is important because it was their flagship weapon of the Retem region, really. Now, I don't have a problem with the relic series at all. Honestly, I think the relic is very healthy for the game. My problem with it is, though, I'm really beating a dead horse for this comment, I swear, is the problem with the relic series isn't a problem with the relic series, it's a problem with the systems in the game of NGS. No system supports another system. Every system in the game is a solo system. They don't help each other in any way. There's no currency that you get for grinding in the combat zones that gives you rewards for actually grinding in the combat zones outside of seasonal events. If we had a vendor like that in-game, and then on top of that had a seasonal event, then that essentially gives us even more reason to grind something that we'd already be grinding for currency in that same way. If we had a vendor system, or just a system in general that supported other systems in the game, a lot of problems would have solved themselves. For example, if we had a system that allowed us to interact with Ida, Manning, and other characters outside of the story, we'd have better connections with those characters. And it goes beyond that. We just need systems to support the current things in the game. And that includes things like cocoons and other pieces of content. Why must everything be isolated and on its own? Why must everything stand on its own? It defeats the purpose of having everything in an MMO. They could make a lot of things in the game a lot better if they just added systems to it. And I'm not talking about full overhauls of the game either. I'm simply just talking about adding the cocoon rooms to the Geolab, expanding on the Geolab, having a progression system in the Geolab with your Cuckoo series being tied to the Geolab. Just things that encourage you to do things that are inside the game that aren't based on Meseta. Because sure, Meseta grinds are encouraging ways for people to play the game. However, we need ways to play the game that are progression based. And progression based gameplay is what a lot of players really want. I've been RSB, what are your opinions on the results of the survey? And I will see you next time.